department. So she's multitasking, and her fascinating work studies from a physicist's point of view the systems of growing plants, how plants grow to the light, or how they respond to gravity, questions about mechanics. Questions about mechanics, information processing in the plant as a dynamical system, etc. I believe we will hear about it. In addition, Yasmine has some projects involving interaction with artists and designers. We will hear about them as well.
Thank you, Iman and Ariel, for organizing this really cool meeting, and for inviting me, of course. So I wasn't sure what kind of talk to give, so I hope it goes well. So maybe I'll start by kind of zooming out and telling you a bit about the kind of questions that we're interested in the lab. And you know, here I said I'm talking about plants, and I say when movement designs structure. So usually when I talk about movement, computation, behavior in plants, people generally kind of raise their eyebrows because plants just sit there, right? If you think of your office plant. This is actually very far from the reality, and I really like to start with this BBC Planet Earth video, which will start in a second. So I just want to point out to look at this circle here. There will be a climbing plant here that will try to twine on a leaf. Okay, now you can imagine David Attenborough saying something perfect. So this guy is trying to twine on the leaf. At some point it realizes, whatever that means, that the leaf is not a good support, so it stops, and it switched to these circular search movements called circumnutations until it arrived to this support, and it somehow assessed that it is a good candidate and twined about it. Okay? So this plant is moving, I hope you all agree, okay? But it's also behaving, right? In the sense that it's solving some kind of navigational problem. It has to reach light, and it has to find a support so that it doesn't fall over in time, right? It has to decide whether something is stable or not. It has to search, okay? So a lot of kind of ubiquitous behavioral processes, which we usually think about when we talk about animals, for example. And they solve these problems in a continuously changing environment, and moreover, their own body changes as well, their own structure, which in itself is not trivial. And maybe I'll touch that point as well. But the really, really, really cool thing about this is that if I now chop this stem, what do I see inside? There's nothing. There's no brain, there's no neurons, just a bunch of cells that are glued together. They can't even move like animal cells, okay? The only thing that's moving here is movement of water and hormones. That's it. Okay, so basically plants, if you think about it, it's kind of magic, right? You have a material that's completely decentralized. There's no central computing brain or whatever, right? And these materials are able to sense, compute stuff, because obviously if you behave, you need to compute stuff, and move. Okay? They somehow control their movement. It's not just a kind of a random movement. Okay, so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. And so very generally speaking, in the lab, this is kind of the things that we're trying to understand. Okay? Because it would be nice to, if we understand how plants work, maybe we can in future make smart materials that behave as well, right? Or compute at least. So maybe just to give a feeling, how do we ask these questions? Okay, let's understand a bit this movement that we see here. So the first thing to note maybe is that at least the movements that I'm talking about here, they're due to growth. That's why they're so slow, and that's why we don't perceive them. Okay? And I can, or maybe if you imagine that you're in this parallel universe where you lived in the same time scale as plants. Imagine yourself walking in the street and have all these plants moving around like this. Maybe we will treat them in a different way, right? Or perceive them differently. So what we do in the lab is that we focus on a specific process called tropisms. Tropisms are a growth-driven movement where basically plants sense a signal. It can be light, it can be gravity, water, whatever, and they grow accordingly in that direction. And you can try these experiments at home with your basil plant. Okay? So this is an example of phototropism. You have light coming from the left, and these cress seedlings grow towards the left. In a second, you see that the light direction switches, and boom. Well, it's not boom, right? It's more like, but the plants sense the switching in direction of the light, and they redirect their growth. Okay? Another example is gravitropism. So the pot is put on the side, plants have sensors for the direction of gravity, and now the shoots grow up, and the roots, which you can't see, grow down. You can imagine why this is imperative, right, for a seedling. And here they switched the pot direction, and again you see that the plants were able to immediately sense the change in the direction of the signal and redirect their growth. And there's something maybe that's I want you to notice in both of these cases where the signal was switched from left to right, from top to bottom. Okay? In the end, the shape of the plant is a kind of a U shape. Okay, so what we understand from this is that when we look at a plant, its shape actually represents the history of everything that is ever sensed, okay, which is an interesting notion, okay? Because in animal systems, once they're grown-ups, that's it, okay? There are no more changes, and we're stuck with what we have, but we'll definitely not look different if yesterday light came from here, or if I ate ice cream. Well, maybe that, yes, but... And at any point, this is a very unique quality of growing systems, and specifically in plants. But there is more. Okay, their shape is not only governed by stimuli which lead to an active change. Okay, you also have passive mechanics. So, oops, sorry. Yeah, we already saw this video, right? The climbing plant obviously interacts somehow with this rod and gets some kind of information from this interaction, right? But also if we think of roots, roots are really, really good at overcoming obstacles, right? So how do they do that? So again, they somehow obtain information by touching stuff, right? And feeling and using, okay, taking advantage of the mechanical laws of physics. So one of the questions that we were interested in the lab is the basics, right? Trying to understand how the plant growth movement, and therefore also its structure, is governed by this interplay between active growth, active movement, or tropisms, and these kind of mechanical interactions. So we decided to look at a specific case as a case study. So turns out, generally, when we study plant science, what people usually do, we take small seedlings and we grow them on agar plates, these hydrogels, and they're grown straight. I guess at some point, these plates somehow fell at some angle to and some scientists opened the fridge and then saw that they had a special shape. Okay, and since then, there are a ton of papers talking about these kind of observations, these shapes that the roots get. So if you're at an angle, you get either this nice waving pattern that looks strikingly like a sine function, and if the angle is big enough, you even get coiling, which is what you see here. Okay, so these shapes are a direct result of this interplay between the root wanting to grow downwards, right, because of gravity, and the mechanical interaction because it can't grow into the gel, it's too hard. So without showing all the equations and so on, basically we have equations which describe these dynamics of tropisms, and we already know the equations which describe the mechanical properties of rods, because we can think of a root or a shoot as basically an elastic rod, right? If you touch it, you feel that it's elastic, and we can measure the elastic properties. And then we can dump everything into a nice numerical simulation. And you see that we're able to recover the waving. And these simulations are, the underlying model is, even though it's quite simple, it doesn't take into account a lot of other complications which we have inherently in biological systems, but it manages to predict the wavelength, so that the shape of the wave as a function of angle, and it even manages to predict at which angle you start to coil. And here is also, if we have nice videos, we should show them. So here you have a coiling option. So the point here is that we understand basically how plant growth, especially in shoots and roots, okay, is shaped by active tropisms, right, from sensory information from the environment, and passive mechanics. And this idea, and maybe I'll point out one more thing, even though I've said it continuously, but it's something that needs to be stressed in a moment, that in the end there's a byproduct, right? The plants move by growing. The byproduct is a structure. Okay, so this is kind of a weird concept in my mind. But we took this idea, and this is part of a larger collaboration from the European Union. This is where Barbara Mazzolai, she's an expert in bio-inspired robotics, and she led this project called Robot. And the idea was to develop a robot, right? If we think of classical robots, they're all generally inspired by the animal world, whether it's humans or dogs or whatever, particularly in terms of locomotion, right? You move your whole body from here to here with the use of legs or wheels or whatever. But if you put a person or one of these robots in an unstructured environment, they fail. Because, right, if I'm in like ruins, okay, I will need a ladder or ropes, or I can't pass through cracks. I'm not made for that, okay? And similarly, these robots. So this robot says, okay, maybe we should take inspiration from a different organism which does really well in ruins. For example, climbing plants, right? Anyone who has an aggressive passiflora in their yard knows that you need to rip up everything together with tiach, what do you call it, on the wall, right? So they know what they're doing over there. And so here you can see the video of this robot which moves by growing. Okay, so this is really literally imitating the plant system. And similarly, when you want to bend, you add more material on one side than the other, which is what occurs in plants. And you can add sensors for light, for gravity, and so you can kind of reproduce these things. So maybe I should say, this head here is basically a 3D printer, and it 3D prints its own body as it goes along. Okay? And again here, this is of course kind of a proof of concept. It's not fast enough to compete with other robots, but it's a direction. There are many different groups now which are kind of working on these concept of growth-driven movement in robotics. And now, okay, I want to move a bit forward and just show you, because I mentioned before, and you can appreciate here, because right, we're creating a material, that through movement, you get a structure. So maybe you can use that. So this idea has been around. I want to show you a couple of examples. This is an example in India, where you have some places where people just started to use, you know, in Tel Aviv especially, I don't know about Jerusalem, you have these huge ficus trees, right? And they have these aerial roots coming from the top. And if you don't chop them, once they connect, they become part of the tree itself, the tree trunk. Okay? So apparently you have a lot of ficus trees in India, or in this area, and they use the roots, you can see it here. They kind of direct their growth and knit them together, so to speak, and it becomes, this is basically a living bridge. And what you see, part of the mechanical secret, let's say, is that you have something called an inosculation, meaning that if you bring two young roots or shoots together, and you apply pressure on them for a long time, they fuse. Okay? Another very cool example, this is kind of different direction. This is already more design. Okay? There's a company called Full Grown. They grow these trees and they direct their motion. Okay? Now what happens if I chop this up and put it upside down? Magic, right? So they produce these beautiful chairs. Each chair is a tree. Okay, I find this kind of mind-blowing. You just need to wait for probably a couple of years for each, but man, it's worth it. Another third example, which is, you know, a bigger scale, is whole buildings. So you have this architectural group. I'm not sure what they call themselves. Baubotanic, they're German, I think, and they have a number of buildings that they built. This is a famous tower that they built, but there are many different other ones. And they use, again, this idea that if you press two shoots together, they will fuse. And here you see also something else, right? And again, these are things that if you open your eyes, when you walk in the street, you will see that they happen naturally. Okay, that this growth, mathematically you see it immediately. There's a one-to-one comparison. But basically growth is flow, like a fluid. So here you can really see it, right? It seems like the tree just went around the rod. So this is just to show, okay, that we can use maybe ideas. If we think now, if we go back to the robot, maybe we can make the robot grow into structure that we want, like a bridge or whatever, right? So this notion of growing and adding material that leads to, as an, let's say, emergent process or emergent result, you can get a structure. Okay, so this is kind of the idea I think I want you to take home. Now for the last 5 minutes I have left, I want to kind of switch and show you some art projects, collaborations with Liat Sega, who's an artist and a very close friend. And incidentally, we actually met during our master's degree. We're in the same room, but maybe I'll just tell you about her because she has a very interesting background. I was doing physics, she was computer science and biology, and after that, she's one of these people who are just too smart. She moved to Microsoft Research, too smart for that, and then she decided, okay, I need to do art. And that's what she does today. But she understands the way of thinking, let's say, of research. So that's why we have a really good relationship, I think, in terms of language. So, okay, so this first project we did 2 seconds before the corona started, the pandemic, and we call it tropism. Okay, so it's inspired by the plant tropisms that I showed you before. And it discusses basically the point that I kind of alluded to at first. We don't think about plants as behaving or doing anything interesting because we can't perceive their movement. Okay, but if we would be able to perceive their movement, we probably would have thought other things about them. So what this work does, maybe I'll show a video of this. You have these stalks, okay, which are kind of weird and eerie, covered with a kind of a carbon material. And you have in this room sunrises and sunsets. And you have some sensors here at the bottom, which sense the direction of light. So this is inspired right by the plant system. And then they bend ever so slowly towards the light. And the idea is that they bend very slowly, right? But fast enough so that we can perceive it. And they're really big, like 2 meters. So you enter this room and you have these creepy, almost human feeling, I don't know, something that moves and reacts, and if you stand in its way, it will react to you. So the idea is to convey, basically, try to look at plants in a different way, right? And the second project that I want to show you is related to something completely different, okay? It's 100% physics, let's say. Okay? It's not a byproduct of plants, but plants use this a lot. And this is kind of elastocapillary processes. What it means, though, is that we're used to looking at water, right, as in a certain way. Okay? We have an intuition of how water should act. When you open the tap, when you drink a glass of water, if you spill some drops on the table, you can see that they're like a pita, right? They're like this. And this is all because there is gravity. But once you remove gravity, or, for example, here, it's such a small drop that gravity becomes negligent, you see that the shape is kind of different. Here it's almost a sphere, okay? So here, again, you have another system, water, a body of water, whose shape is entirely defined by external forces, gravity, and surface tension. And the question is, what happens when you remove gravity? Then we'll see water behavior, which is not intuitive. And so this is the idea of impossible object. It was, if you remember, a couple of years ago, there was Eitan Stiva, who went to the space station, and he also had these calls for art projects. And this project was one of the few that was chosen happily. And the idea was to make a sculpture which can exist only in space. So here, with the last minute that I have, show you a nice video. This is our box. When that Eitan is basically, he had to operate everything on the space station for us. And this is a set of rods. Here you're supposed to attach the drinking bag for water, and the two main rods on the side are hollow, so water will be pushed through them. So here we're trying to see the adhesion forces and trying to guess what it would look like in space, which is very scary, right, to make a prediction with zero intuition. We had to make a nice box. And this is Eitan, who's building it. And now this is the drinking bag, and he's pushing water through the holes. And you see that these beautiful spheres are growing and somehow moving once in a while when there's a push. And this is mostly driven by water tension here. And that's it. This was a very special occasion that we managed to do this, so we're very happy about it. And that's it. With this, I just want to thank, though, with the people who actually make things happen in the lab, which are my wonderful students. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions.